The prenup was 19 pages long. Naomi read every word in 6 minutes and 14 seconds. Then she signed it. No questions, no hesitation, not a single request to change one clause. She handed the pen back, returned to her seat, and picked up her wine glass. The woman who had drafted it, who had spent 3 weeks shaping every paragraph to lock Naomi out of everything the Kang family had ever built, blinked once. She had expected resistance, tears perhaps, an argument, some visible crack in the composure of the woman her son had married. What she got was stillness. And something about that stillness, quiet, unhurried, giving nothing away, unsettled Eleanor Kang in a way she could not name and would not understand until it was far too late. What no one in that penthouse knew was this. Naomi Carter hadn't signed because she had no choice. She had signed because the prenup didn't matter, not even a little. Stay with this one. Because what happens over the next few hours in that room on the 41st floor of the Meridian Tower is going to change everything you think you know about power, leverage, and who actually holds it. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and if you're new here, hit subscribe. You do not want to miss how this ends. The Meridian Tower sits at the northern edge of Lincoln Park. 41 floors of steel and glass that catch the Chicago skyline and throw it back like a challenge. On the evening of October 17th, the penthouse belonged to Eleanor Kang. It was the 3rd anniversary of Kang Meridian Group's flagship residential development, and Eleanor had decided the milestone deserved the kind of event that reminded everyone exactly where they stood. 60 guests, flowers from Osaka, a sommelier from a 3-Michelin-star kitchen, one message calibrated into every detail, that the Kang name was permanent and permanence was not available to just anyone. Naomi arrived at 7:43 p.m. She wore a deep green dress, not the color of money, but something more complicated. The color of something that had been growing quietly in the dark for a long time. Hair pinned simply, nothing that asked to be noticed. She noticed everything. She moved through the room the way her father had taught her. Eyes open, expression easy, cataloging without appearing to. The absence of 4 paintings on the east wall replaced with unsigned, unfamiliar work. The catering staff moving with the efficiency of people reduced from a larger number. Small signals, individually meaningless. Together, a sentence. Eleanor found her within 4 minutes. Naomi. Warm in the way of a handshake that is slightly too firm. Eleanor touched her arm briefly, then turned back to the couple beside her. This is Julian's wife. She's been involved in the community side of things. A pause timed precisely to imply the sentence was complete. Then, now where were we, the Lakeshore proposal? Naomi kept her expression easy, Julian's wife, not Naomi Carter. Not a woman with a name or a father who had spent the 30 years watching empires collapse quietly in conference rooms. Just a relational designation, a placeholder. She had heard it before. Last October, Do-hyun's partner. The March dinner, no introduction at all. A silence so practiced it had to be intentional. 100 small gestures, none of them accidental. These were not accidents, but they were also not what Naomi was thinking about tonight. She found a spot near the far windows. 41 floors below, Chicago moved in the dark, the grid spreading west until it blurred. South side, 8 miles. She thought about what 8 miles meant depending on which direction you were traveling. You look like you're solving something. She turned. Korean-American, late 20s, the posture of someone recently told his opinion mattered in rooms like this one. His name tag read Daniel Cho, Kang Meridian Investment Partners. Just thinking, Naomi said. About? She let the pause sit. Distance. He nodded as if the answer made sense and returned his attention to the room. She noted his face. The way he watched Eleanor, admiration edged with deference. The look of a man who had decided proximity to power was the same as understanding it. The way he straightened slightly when Do-hyun entered 11 minutes later from the far side of the room. Do-hyun. She watched her husband work the space the way he always did. Precise, controlled warmth, genuine but carefully rationed. 3 investors, hands shaken. Something low exchanged with Victor near the bar. His mother's shoulder touched briefly in passing. Then he crossed toward Naomi. His hand found on the small of her back, the gesture of a man who knew her. Automatic, familiar. And in its familiarity was something that looked like care and functioned on most nights as a substitute for it. How are you holding up? Low voice. Fine. He looked at her. Not searching, but aware. There was something in Do-hyun's eyes she had spent a long time trying to name. Not indifference, not cruelty. Something more painful. The look of a man who had chosen comfort over honesty so many times the choice had become invisible to him. 14 months ago, Eleanor had made a comment at dinner, aimed with precision at the woman sitting across the table. Do-hyun had heard it. Naomi had watched him hear it, watched his hand move toward his glass. She had waited. He had reached for the wine. He had not said anything. That was the moment Naomi understood, fully and without ambiguity, what kind of silence she was living inside. Victor tilted his head from across the room. Do-hyun's hand left her back. Excuse me, he said quietly. He walked away. Naomi watched him go. He was not a bad man. That was the complicated part. He had grown up inside a structure so self-reinforcing that questioning it had always cost more than silence. 32 years. The debt had become invisible. The music softened. Conversations moved around her like water. 11 minutes later, Marcus Webb appeared at her elbow. 61, silver-haired, professionally pleasant for so long his face had forgotten how to be anything else. Senior partner, Webb and Callaway LLP. Kang Family Counsel for 19 years. Mrs. Kang. A moment. She did not correct the name. Of course. He placed a folder on the cocktail table beside her. 19 pages, clean margins. The kind of document drafted by someone who expected it signed without being read. Naomi picked it up. From her clutch, she took the Mont Blanc her father had given her the day she passed the bar. Black, understated. He had pressed it into her hand in a diner parking lot in Atlanta. Sign your name to anything with this pen. You better know every word of what you're signing. She began to read, not because she was nervous, because she respected legal language, and because she needed to confirm that Marcus Webb had been exactly as thorough as she expected. He had been. Every Kang Meridian asset named, cataloged, sealed behind language that said, across 19 careful pages, "You may live here, but you will never belong to this." From across the room, Eleanor watched, not hiding the fact. That was deliberate, a reminder that this moment was being witnessed. Naomi finished the last page. She uncapped the Mont Blanc. She signed clean, unhurried, her full name in the steady cursive her father had insisted on. A signature should look like it cost something to give. She capped the pen, returned it to her clutch, picked up her champagne. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Eleanor had expected tears, or argument, some visible evidence the document had landed the way it was meant to. What she got was a woman finishing her drink, glancing toward the windows, as if Chicago had just said something mildly interesting. 6 feet away, Daniel Cho had watched the entire exchange. He looked at Naomi, then at Eleanor, then back at Naomi. He set his champagne glass down. He did not pick it back up. What no one in that room understood was that Eleanor's document protected exactly nothing that mattered. The thing Naomi had spent 11 months building wasn't a claim. It was something quieter and far more permanent, something the Kang family had never thought to defend against, because they had never imagined someone like her would know how to use it. Raymond Carter had a rule about numbers, not round ones. Round numbers were for people who wanted to sound like they understood something without actually understanding it. Real numbers had texture. Real numbers had remainders. They told you the difference between a story being managed and a truth being lived. He had told Naomi this when she was 17, sitting across from him at the kitchen table in their house in Atlanta. A small house, a careful house, the kind where every dollar had a name. He was reviewing a client file. She was supposed to be doing homework. Instead, she was watching him. "What are you looking for?" she had asked. He had not looked up. The number they didn't mean to leave in. She had not fully understood that until she was 23, sitting in the offices of Thornfield Analytics on the 14th floor of a building in the West Loop, watching a senior analyst lay out what 6 months of financial research had uncovered about Kang Meridian Group. The number they hadn't meant to leave in was $287,400,000, not $287 million. $287,400,000. The remainder mattered. It always did. That was the size of the private credit facility that Kang Meridian had arranged in the spring of 2020. A structured loan drawn against the full portfolio of their real estate holdings, used to fund 4 development projects in the outer Milwaukee suburbs. The projects had been positioned as premium residential developments. Mixed use, walkable, the kind of language that appeared in prospectus documents and community board presentations and nowhere else. All 4 projects had failed, not dramatically, not in the way that made headlines. They had failed the way things failed when the people running them had confused ambition with preparation, but quietly, methodically, over 18 months until the projected returns had dissolved and the debt remained, and the only thing left was the collateral. The Kang estate, their holdings in Lincoln Park and River North, the penthouse at the Meridian Tower, 3 additional residential towers under management. Everything the family had spent 3 generations presenting to the world as evidence of permanence. All of it pledged, all of it held against a debt that, by the time Naomi was sitting in that office in the West Loop, was 4 years old and had been sold twice. The first sale had moved the credit facility from the original lending consortium to a mid-market distressed debt fund based in Connecticut. The second sale, executed 14 months after the first, documented through 3 intermediary shell entities registered in Delaware, had moved it to a holding company called Harlow Capital Group. Harlow Capital Group had a Delaware registration, a trust structure administered through a Cayman Islands vehicle, and a final authorization document signed in Singapore. Who controls it? Naomi had asked the analyst. He had slid a single sheet across the table. She had looked at it for a long time. Then she had said, how much to acquire it? The number he had given her was not a round one either. She had not used her own money. What Naomi had done was not an act of wealth. It was an act of knowledge. She had found a financial partner, a small institutional fund whose managing director had worked with her father 2 decades earlier, and presented a case. Not an emotional one, a structural one. The asset was undervalued, the acquisition clean, the returns defensible under 3 different scenarios. The managing director had taken 4 days to respond. His answer had been yes. The transfer had been completed 9 months before Naomi stood in a penthouse on the 41st floor of the Meridian Tower and signed a prenuptial agreement with a Mont Blanc pen her father had given her. She had not told Do-hyun, not because she was hiding something from him, not the way people imagined later. She had not told him because she needed to know first who he was going to be, whether the man she had married would eventually find his way to the right side of the line his family kept drawing. She had stayed. She had shown him through 2 years of mornings and dinners and events like this one, exactly who she was. She had waited for him to choose her. He had not chosen her, not once, not loudly, just in the quiet accumulation of moments when he had known the right thing and reached for his wine glass instead. She had her answer, and she had the note. What most people did not understand about distressed debt acquisition. What the Kang family's own legal counsel had apparently never considered as a risk, which told Naomi something important about the insularity of people who had been powerful for too long, was that owning the instrument was not the same as owning the asset. She did not own the Kang estate. She did not own the Meridian Tower. She did not own a single painting or wine bottle or square foot of marble flooring. What she owned was the mechanism by which all of those things could be called. The prenup Marcus Webb had drafted protected every Kang Meridian asset from any claim Naomi might make as a spouse. It did not protect those assets from enforcement proceedings initiated by an unrelated creditor. Those were 2 different things. Naomi had understood this distinction since she was 19 years old. She was relatively certain Marcus Webb was about to understand it for the first time. Back in the penthouse, the evening had moved on. Guests had shifted to a seated dinner. Naomi took her place 3 seats to Do-hyun's right, between an architect from River North who kept checking his phone and a woman in municipal finance with kind eyes who seemed to sense, without being told, that Naomi was not entirely present. She ate. She answered questions when they were asked. She watched the room the way her father had taught her. At 9:47 p.m., Marcus Webb's phone rang. She knew the number that was calling. She watched him glance at the screen, watched his expression do something small and involuntary. A flicker, barely visible, the kind of reaction a 61-year-old man produced when something registered as wrong before his professional training could suppress it. He excused himself from the table. He stepped toward the east corridor. Naomi set down her fork. She was not ready to move yet. This part required patience, the same patience she had practiced for 11 months, the same patience her father had modeled every time a client called in a panic and answered in a steady voice, "Let me tell you what is actually happening." She picked up her water glass. She waited. What no one at that table realized was that the phone call Marcus Webb had just stepped away to take was not the beginning of what was about to happen. It was the end of everything the Kang family had believed was already settled. Marcus Webb was gone for 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Naomi knew because she counted. Not obsessively. Calmly, the way her father had taught her to count things that mattered. Time. Paragraphs. The silence between someone asking a question and someone deciding how to answer it. 4 minutes and 31 seconds was long enough to receive information you hadn't expected. Not long enough to figure out what to do about it. When he returned, his expression had been rebuilt into something professionally neutral, but the reconstruction was slightly too careful. The straightening itself was the evidence. He sat down, did not reach for his wine, leaned toward Victor and said something low enough that the table couldn't hear. Victor's fork stopped moving. 54 years old, thinner than Do-hyun, the same angular features softened by 2 decades of comfortable decisions. He had managed Kang Meridian's finances for 11 years. In Naomi's assessment, a man who understood numbers well enough to use them and not well enough to fear them. He heard what Marcus said. He set his fork down entirely. Naomi took a slow sip of water. Victor touched Eleanor's arm. 2 fingers, a brief press, the family's shorthand for something that needed handling. Eleanor registered it without looking at him. Her eyes moved across the table with the practiced sweep of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms and landed, for just a moment, on Naomi. Naomi looked back at her. Not with challenge, not with satisfaction, just a long, even look, the kind that gives nothing and takes nothing and simply exists, steady as a wall. Eleanor's gaze moved on. She stood, smoothed her dress, said something gracious to the guests nearest her, and crossed to where Marcus and Victor had gathered near the east corridor. The 3 of them stood close together in the way of people who needed to appear casual while having a very different conversation. Naomi watched. She watched Eleanor's shoulders when Marcus handed her his phone. The slight rise, the pullback, the involuntary posture of a body absorbing something the mind wasn't ready for. Eleanor read the screen, then read it again. Then Eleanor looked up. Across the length of the dining room, past the flowers from Osaka and the crystal and the 60 guests who had been invited to witness the permanence of the Kang name, Eleanor looked directly at Naomi. Naomi did not look away. 3 seconds passed, maybe 4. Then Eleanor crossed the room. She moved with complete composure. That was the thing about Eleanor Kang. Whatever was happening inside her, the surface held. It had held through her husband's death. Through 3 rounds of restructuring the family had never publicly acknowledged. Through every room that had ever needed it. It held now. She stopped at Naomi's chair. Would you join us for a moment? Not a request, exactly. But measured enough to perform as one. Of course, Naomi said. She set her napkin on the table, pushed her chair back, and stood. She did not bring the folio. She did not need to. Everything she needed was already exactly where it was supposed to be. She followed Eleanor to the east corridor. Victor and Marcus were waiting. The corridor was quiet, marble floors, low lighting, the dinner muffled on the other side of the wall, a space designed for discretion. The Kang family had always known which rooms were for display and which were for business. Marcus spoke first because that was his function. Mrs. Kang. The formal address had weight behind it now. We've received a notification from a creditor, Harlow Capital Group, claiming to hold a structured credit instrument against Kang Meridian assets. They're requesting confirmation of the collateral portfolio within 72 hours. He paused. Are you aware of this company? I am, she said. The corridor got very quiet. Victor made a sound, not a word, something shorter than a word. A compression of breath that happens when a number you thought you understood turns out to have a remainder you missed. Eleanor did not make a sound. She stood perfectly still, her hands loose at her sides, her face composed with the discipline of a woman who had decided, somewhere in the 14 years since her husband died, that she would never again let a room see her break. How? Eleanor said and stopped. She started again. What is your connection to this company? Naomi reached into her jacket and removed a folded sheet, set it on the console table. 4 pages. Harlow Capital Group's ownership chain. Delaware registration, Cayman Trust vehicle, Singapore authorization. The final line, N.E. Carter, beneficial owner. Eleanor looked at it, then at Naomi. You own our debt, Victor said. Not a question. The flat delivery of someone naming a fact they did not want to be true. I own the instrument that holds your portfolio as collateral, Naomi said. Which is a more precise way of describing what your family has been standing on for the last 4 years, not a legacy. A liability with a very expensive address. Marcus leaned over the document. His expression confirmed what Victor's voice had already said. 6 feet down the corridor, barely visible near the turn toward the main hall, Daniel Cho stood motionless. He had stepped away from the table 2 minutes earlier and come close enough to hear before any of them noticed. He did not move, did not announce himself. He simply stood and listened and understood he was watching something he would not forget. You signed the prenup, Eleanor said, and there was something in it. Not quite desperation, but the sound of a woman reaching for the one solid thing she still believed she had. You signed it tonight, in front of witnesses. I did, Naomi said, willingly. The prenup protects your family's assets from any claim I might make as a spouse. She let that sit for exactly 1 breath. It does not protect them from enforcement proceedings by an unrelated creditor. The silence that followed was the kind that does not recover, not the silence of a pause, the silence of a room that has just changed shape. Eleanor turned to the doorway, toward the dining room where Do-hyun was still seated at the head of the table, talking to a guest about something that had nothing to do with any of this. Get Do-hyun, she said to Victor. Even. Controlled. The voice of a woman who had not yet decided whether what she felt was rage or grief, and was not going to decide in a corridor in front of a creditor. Victor went. Naomi looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Naomi. For the first time that evening, possibly the first time in 2 years, there were no guests between them. No performance required. Just 2 women in a corridor, each understanding with complete clarity exactly what the other had done. What none of them were ready for was what Naomi was going to ask for next, because it had nothing to do with money. And that would take all of them the longest to understand. Do-hyun entered the corridor 30 seconds after Victor. He had straightened his jacket on the way. The automatic gesture of a man told something requires his attention, but not yet what. His expression was composed, the way it always was when something needed managing. He looked at his mother first, then Marcus, then Victor, then he looked at Naomi. Something shifted, not on the surface. The surface held, the way it always held in this family. But underneath, in the set of his jaw and the slight change in how he carried his weight, Naomi saw it. Not surprise, something older. He had known on some level that this woman was not who his families had decided she was. The way you know a song is wrong before you can name the note. He had simply chosen again and again not to examine the knowing. What's happening? He said. His voice was quiet, even, directed at no one in particular and therefore at all of them. Marcus explained briefly, the way lawyers explain things when the explanation was not going to help. Do-hyun listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, he looked at the 4-page document on the console table and read it, carefully, not quickly, the way some documents require. When he set it down, he did not speak immediately. The corridor was very quiet. In here, everything had stopped. This is real, Do-hyun said finally. Not a question, Naomi said. Eleanor's voice came sharp and low. Do-hyun, she has, I know what she has. His voice was not sharp. It was something quieter than sharp, which was harder to argue with. I read it. A silence. Marcus cleared his throat. The enforcement window opens in 72 hours. We have options, but they require. Marcus. Do-hyun said his name without looking at him. Marcus stopped. Do-hyun looked at Naomi. What do you want? He said. Not accusatory. Not desperate. The flat, direct question of a man who had finally decided that understanding the situation completely was worth more than protecting himself from it. Naomi reached into her jacket and removed a second document, 12 pages, thicker, denser. 8 months of work that had everything to do with the reason she had built Harlow in the first place. She set it on the console table beside the ownership summary. 3 things, she said. Eleanor looked at the document. You came here prepared. I've been prepared for 11 months, Naomi said. I was waiting to see if I would need to use it. A pause. I needed to use it. She looked at Do-hyun when she said that. She watched the meaning land below the professional surface, registering for what it was. Not a legal statement. A reckoning. She looked back at the document. The first condition. Kang Meridian divests completely from the Halstead Corridor and Auburn Gresham projects. Both full divestiture. No retained interest. No management contracts. Victor made a sound. Those projects represent. I know what they represent. Naomi said so. Know what they're going to do to 1,412 families in the next 18 months if they move forward. Those are 2 different kinds of value, and only one of them is on your balance sheet. The Halstead Corridor project had been positioned as urban revitalization, carefully worded prospectus language describing a process that would, within 4 rental cycles, price out every longtime resident of 2 South Side neighborhoods that had housed working families for 3 generations. 1,412 families. Naomi had the number from a community impact assessment that Kang Meridian had commissioned, received, and declined to publish. The number they hadn't meant to leave in. Second, the Kang Meridian Community Development Fund, $14.3 million, currently controlled by a board reporting to Eleanor, transfers to an independent trust. 5-member board, community representatives, not family appointees. Eleanor's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. The fund had been her project. 14 years, her name on every press release. The proof, as she had once told a Tribune journalist, that the Kang family understood their responsibility to the city. Third, she looked at Marcus. You resigned from all Kang Meridian advisory and board positions within 30 days, Marcus straightened. That is completely. You reviewed the community impact assessment for the Halstead Corridor project, Naomi said. You signed the legal clearance. You knew what was in it. Marcus said nothing. Victor started to speak. Eleanor touched his arm, one hand brief. He stopped. Eleanor looked at the documents, then at Naomi. Not an adversary, something else entirely. You could have enforced without conditions, Eleanor said. You had the instrument. You could have called the debt and taken everything. Yes, Naomi said. Why didn't you? Naomi was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't want your buildings, she said. I wanted the 1,412 families to still have theirs. The corridor held that. Daniel Cho, 6 feet away in the shadow near the turn, pressed his back against the wall. His eyes were open. His champagne had been left on a table somewhere in the dining room. He would not remember setting it down. He was thinking about a housing stability report he had flagged 3 months ago and been told was not relevant to Kang Meridian's strategic priorities. He had accepted that answer. He was thinking that he'd not want to accept it again. Do-hyun had not spoken since asking what she wanted. He stood still, jacket straight, face composed, and something behind it that had been gathering for much longer than tonight was finally finding the shape of what it needed to become. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen from the console table, Naomi's pen, left there with the documents. He held it a moment, then opened the 12-page document to the signature page. He signed, clean, unhurried. Eleanor watched him do it. She did not try to stop him. When he set the pen down, he looked at Naomi. Not with relief, not with absolution, with the expression of someone who has done the first honest thing in a long chain of dishonest ones, understanding that this does not erase the chain. It only means the chain ends here. I should have said something, he said, a year ago, at dinner. Naomi looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. Victor started to object. Eleanor stopped him with a look. The look of a woman who had just understood something about herself she was not yet ready to say out loud. She was quiet. Then, addressing no one in particular, my husband built this company on a credit line from 3 banks that believed in him before he had anything to show them. He said once that the most important thing about leverage was knowing when you owed it to someone else. She looked at the document Do-hyun had just signed. He would have said she was right, Eleanor said. No one answered. That was answer enough. The enforcement proceedings concluded 43 days later. Not with a courtroom, not with a headline. With documents signed in a conference room on the 22nd floor of a building in the Loop, witnessed by 4 attorneys and a notary public who had done this work for 30 years and would later say he had never seen a restructuring executed with that degree of precision. Every clause held. Not one was successfully contested. The Halsted Corridor project and the Auburn Gresham acquisition were formally terminated on a Wednesday morning. The development rights transferred to the Chicago Housing Authority through a process that took 11 days and involved no press releases, no announcements, and no photographs of anyone shaking hands in front of anything. The 1,412 families received letters. The letters said, in the careful language of Municipal Housing Administration, that the redevelopment proposals affecting their neighborhoods had been withdrawn and that their current lease and ownership arrangements would not be subject to disruption. The letters did not explain why. They did not name anyone. Most of the families who received them did not know what had happened. They just knew that something at some point had changed in their favor. That was enough. The Kang Meridian Community Development Fund transferred to independent governance 6 weeks after closing. The new board held its first meeting in a community center in Bronzeville. Eleanor Kang was not on the board. She was, however, in the room, back row, unannounced, not introduced. No one asked her to leave. She stayed for the full 2 hours. Marcus Webb submitted his resignation 17 days before the deadline. No statement. 3 of his other clients quietly moved their accounts in the following month. Some losses are not the kind you contest publicly. Kang Meridian itself did not collapse. That was something Naomi had understood from the beginning, which was why the agreement had been structured the way it was. The company restructured, painful and slow, requiring Victor to have conversations he had spent years avoiding. But the core assets stabilized, the credit facility resolved on demanding but survivable terms, and 18 months later, Kang Meridian was smaller, more carefully managed, and no longer building anything on the south side. Julian stepped back from day-to-day operations in February. He described it, in the brief internal communication Victor distributed, as a leave of absence to reassess the company's strategic direction. That was accurate as far as it went. What it did not say was that he had spent the weeks following October 17th doing something he had not done in a long time, sitting with the discomfort of understanding who he had been and what that had cost, without reaching for anything to make the discomfort smaller. He had not reached out to Naomi. She had not expected him to. Some things cannot be repaired by reaching out. They can only be acknowledged, lived with, and, if the person doing the living is honest about what is required, slowly transformed into something that makes the next choice a different one. 3 months after the restructuring, Daniel Cho submitted his resignation from Kang Meridian Investment Partners. His letter was 2 paragraphs long and thanked the firm for the opportunity without elaborating on his reasons. 6 months after that, a small investment fund registered in Illinois filed its incorporation documents. Purpose: impact investment in affordable housing preservation across the Chicago metro area. Managing partner, Daniel Cho. He had called his father the night before filing. His father, who had emigrated from Seoul in 1987 and spent 20 years running a dry cleaning business in Pilsen, had listened to the whole explanation and said, "You're going to lose money." Daniel had said, "Probably at first." His father was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. "The things worth doing usually cost something at the beginning." 8 months after October 17th, Naomi Carter was in Atlanta. 3rd floor office on Peachtree Street. Not a prestigious address, good light and enough space for 4 desks. The company was called Carter Thornfield Advisory. 4 people, no press release, no announcement. The work was the work her father had done, finding the number they hadn't meant to leave in. Helping organizations understand what they actually owned versus what they believed they owned. Restructuring things in ways that left the people at the bottom with more than they'd had before rather than less. Her father called on a Saturday morning in June. "How's the city?" he asked. "Warm," she said. "How are you?" "Old," he said, "but useful." She laughed. "How do you feel?" he asked, "about all of it?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Atlanta was moving through a Saturday the way Atlanta moved, slow and green and particular about its own pace. "Like I stopped waiting for permission," she said. He was quiet. "Your mother would have liked her," he said. "The woman you've become." Naomi did not answer immediately. She looked at the desk in front of her. At the Mont Blanc pen in the corner of the desk tray, black, understated, the cap slightly worn from years of use, she had not put it away. She had not made anything ceremonial of it. It was just a pen, given to her by a man who had spent 30 years teaching her to read the difference between what something appeared to be and what it actually was. She had used it to sign a document everyone in that room had believed was a surrender. She picked it up. She set it back down. "Tell me about this client," her father said. She opened her laptop. "Okay," she said. "So, there's a number here they definitely didn't mean to leave in." She heard him smile through the phone. She began to explain. On the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood called Auburn Gresham, a woman named Patricia Holloway was sitting on her front porch on a Saturday morning in June. She had lived in that house for 27 years. She had raised 3 children there. She had, at one point 8 months ago, received a letter from a development company informing her that her building was located in a zone identified for potential acquisition. She had received a second letter 4 months later saying the acquisition had been withdrawn. She did not know why. She did not know the name Naomi Carter. She did not know Kang Meridian or Harlow Capital Group or Thornfield Analytics. She knew that she was sitting on her porch on a Saturday morning in a house that was still hers. The coffee was hot. The street was quiet. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. There's a question I keep coming back to after this story. Not how did she do it, or did she win? Those answers are in the documents. The harder question is, at what point did Naomi Carter stop being someone things were done to and start being someone who had already made her decisions? I think the answer is a kitchen table in Atlanta. A father who taught her not what to think, but how to look. The number they didn't mean to leave in. She didn't build Harlow Capital Group for revenge. She built it because she needed to know the truth. And then she waited to see if the man she married would find his way to the same truth on his own. He didn't. What stays with me isn't the acquisition. It isn't the corridor reveal or the 3 conditions. It's that she had every legal right to take everything. And she used that leverage not to destroy, but to protect 1,412 people who never knew her name. That's not a legal move. That's character. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. When she signed the prenup without hesitation, when Julian picked up her pen, or that last image of Patricia Holloway on her porch, not knowing why her house was still hers. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. If this is your first time here, subscribe. We tell stories about people who understood something the powerful around them didn't. Like this video if it meant something to you. Share it with one person who needs to hear that knowing your worth doesn't always look like fighting for it. Sometimes it looks like being very, very patient and already prepared.